Hi, everybody. My name is Justin. I'm a fitness instructor from PSP Kingston. Today I'm going to be talking with you a little bit about the low back and what sort of things we can do to maintain a healthy back. First portion of the video here, we're going to be doing a little bit of a lecture, and then the second portion afterwards, we're going to move into a little bit of a kind of practical section. So I'm going to share my screen here with you. Just give me a quick moment. Get this started up. There we are. So, the importance of the low back and how it relates to functional and mental health. A couple topics we're going to look at today. First big one is going to be the anatomy of the low back. We're going to do just a very basic overview. There's a lot to talk about. The muscles I'm going to mention, that is by no means an exhaustive list, but we're going to give you a little bit of an idea to get you started anyways. Then we're going to chat a little bit about mobility and stability as well as balance. So this is all relating to how our body as a whole, different regions are meant to be a little bit more mobile and other regions are meant to be a little bit more stable. And where we're looking at is the low back, the lumbar region of the spine, that's meant to be a little bit more stable in our body. And we're going to chat about the contour muscle and how that affects us with both movement and as far as pain goes. And we're going to chat about the functional effects of chronic low back pain, and we're also going to look at some of the mental effects as well. Afterward, that's where we're going to get to the practical portion, and we're going to go through some movements to help prevent low back pain and help prevent low back injuries from occurring in the first place. So we'll get right started. This here is our spine. Where we're going to be focusing a lot more is in this lumbar region of the spine. I just want to mention something real quick here. Some of you actually may have heard the terms kyphosis and lordosis. So kyphosis actually applies more to the upper region of the spine up towards the neck, and that's your typical kind of head forward posture. Lordosis is actually in the region that we're talking about, and that's when kind of this lower portion of the spine is like pushed forward and forces your spine almost into an S shape. Whereas if you can see here, we have that nice gentle curvature of the spine. It really dramatically causes that S pattern in the spine, which kyphosis and lordosis put a very large amount of pressure on the disc in between the vertebrae. So what we're going to be kind of leaning into is talking about the importance of maintaining this nice gentle curvature of the spine. Moving into our next slide here, we're going to start talking about some of the muscles that are in your back to help keep that nice gentle curvature of the spine. And first one we're going to actually talk about are the glutes, which, yes, technically are not in your back, but they do have a large effect on your back health. So if you see the image here down to the left, that's kind of a good little picture of what the glutes look like inside your body. You've got your glute medius, your glute maximus, as well as the minimus in there underneath. And then to the right, you have what are called your erector spinae, which is not one specific muscle, but it does run up the length of the back, and is definitely affecting in that low back. So basically, these muscles here really help us with kind of our basic functions throughout the day, like sitting, standing, keeping a good posture, being able to kind of walk upright. So essentially, they are the muscles that help hold up our spine and work us into extension, so keeping that nice, good, tall posture. And next up, we've got the flexor muscle. So again, these not particularly in the position of your back, but have a very, very large effect on our back health. So these are also very much known as the abdominal muscles. So I've only got two pictured here. There are quite a few, and there are some smaller ones. But one we're going to talk quite a bit about here is the one on the right, which is your transverse abdomen, so that large red section in there. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail about that one. And then over on the left, we have your rectus abdominis, which is a little bit more the superficial abdominal muscles, whereas the transverse abdominis or the EA muscle is right, just superficial to the spine itself. So these muscles help with our flexion motion, so our tilting forward. They enable us to reach for things, they help us with lifting things up, and they help with arching our back and keep keep us stabilized when necessary. Then we've got the oblique muscles, so the internal and external oblique muscles. These typically kind of sit in between the ribs in the front of our abdominal muscles. Most of these is essentially helping us with rotation as well as resisting rotational force, so any external rotational forces coming at us. In that way, they also help us with maintaining our posture. This was a big portion I wanted to that I kind of hinted at from the beginning. So looking at kind of mobility and stability through the spine as a whole. So we're going to kind of work our way from top to bottom. I know we're kind of focusing on the lumbar spine, but big thing, we want to be nice and mobile in our T-spine. So that's kind of in our upper back. We're going to chat about this in a little bit when we get to the exercise portion. Then we want to be nice and stable through the low back, through that lumbar spine. We want everything to stay nice and packed and there not be a lot of movement through there. And we want to have good mobility through the hips. So down below the lumbar spine, we want to be able to move all down there. All of these should combine in order to keep us nice and healthy and able to maintain proper movement when we're doing either functional exercises or any of our activities of daily living. We want to be nice and mobile up top because we do not want to be too mobile through our lumbar spine. When we're too mobile through our lumbar spine, we have a lot of shifting down there, and that's where we kind of start to develop some of our low back pain. And the same goes for if we're not super mobile through the hips, if we're not getting a lot of movement there, we're going to have a lot of pulling from the muscles. That again is going to put our lumbar spine out of place and result in that low back pain. So we're going to chat a bit more about that in the next slide here. So we want to talk a little bit about balance in the body, especially when it comes to our low back health. So we kind of very briefly introduced the muscles, and that is by no means an exhaustive list of muscles that do affect our low back, just kind of to give everybody a bit of an idea. We're looking at here though, if we have weak abdominals, so those muscles in the front that help with our flexion of the torso, combined with weak glutes, and those muscles that help with our extension, what that's going to lead to is a bit of a cross pattern. So kind of think about in an X, kind of from your abdominals, from your front down to your glutes. We want those nice, balanced, and strong. But the muscles opposite of those, so your rector spinae in your low back, those muscles, that big long one that runs up the spine, those ones down in your low back, combined with your hip flexors, so kind of right on the front of your thighs through into your groin. Those will end up being tight if we have weak abdominals and weak glutes. What this means is that some muscles are going to end up working more than others, and we don't want that. When muscles are overworked, when they have kind of certain tasks that they're supposed to do, everything kind of works nice, things stay nice and strong, nothing gets too sore or tight. What happens when we have weakness somewhere, it ends up with other muscles having to work a little bit too much or doing tasks that they're not meant to do, which fatigues them and means that things are not working kind of in unison together. That's where we kind of start to get some of our back pain. So let's talk a little bit about the functional effects of chronic low back pain. So one of the big things, let's kind of chat a little bit about first what's the difference between kind of chronic and acute. Acute low back pain is when, say, we bend over real quick and we get that tweak of something in our low back and it hurts for a couple days, but then it goes away and we're back to kind of moving well. That pain doesn't reoccur on us. Chronic low back pain can be, we always have that low back pain, or it seems to come back in waves. So you'll hear people talk about that their back's bugging them a little bit, and then they're good. They do some stretching, they do some exercises, they get a little bit of movement in there. They feel pretty decent, but it keeps coming back kind of throughout the weeks, months, years, that sort of thing. And it can have a very large draining effect on your life. So the thing with people who suffer from chronic low back pain is they actually have a higher pain tolerance. This is not a good thing in this case. This means that they don't really know when they're in pain for certain things just because they're used to having pain all of the time. So pain in our body is actually used to kind of remind our body not to do certain things. If certain things are causing pain, we probably should not be doing them, or we should find some different way of doing them, or find something different to do first before we kind of move on to whatever that movement is. So people with chronic low back pain, they'll tend to start ignoring pain signals from their body, and that's where they just kind of compound their injuries and just continue to hurt, which is not a good thing at all. Also, some studies have shown that people with chronic low back pain actually have decreased muscle activity. So they've used different tests like just having people do simple back extensions and looking through a functional MRI. You can actually see that these muscles are not activating to their full potential just because of the pain, whether people are actually aware of it or if it's just a subconscious thing that their body will not let them activate any further. This is kind of combined with improper muscle activity, how we talked a bit about balance earlier. The muscles end up working too hard when some of those muscles in the back or helping to protect the back are not doing their job properly. Other muscles take over, and this is not good because it can lead to injuries in other areas of the body as well. So people with low back pain end up having to do things a little bit differently because they're constantly in pain. This leads to poor body mechanics, even just doing simple things like picking something up off the floor, or even something as simple as like sitting down in a chair for dinner. Having poor body mechanics just in general ends up leading to other injuries in the body. This kind of coincides also with poor posture, like we talked about earlier, that kyphotic or lordotic positioning of the spine. It starts to get worse as you start to get older, as gravity kind of starts to wear on you, as the discs in your spine start to wear a little bit, just from kind of general movement and that sort of thing. Having a poor posture to begin with is going to put a lot more pressure on those discs in between your spine. If we are standing nice and tall, those muscles are working well for us. What's happening is the spine is in the position that it should be. So we're not putting over pressure on those discs of the spine. So along with some of the functional effects of chronic low back pain, we also have to look at kind of the mental effects and the mental drain that it has on people. So I'm by no means an expert in this field, but there are a couple of things that we can kind of look at. I have worked with people suffering from chronic low back pain, and you can kind of see things that it affects in people. We're just going to chat very briefly kind of about this, but there's a large number of effects that it can take a toll on someone. So chronic pain in general wears on mental health, most definitely. Basically, you kind of get used to pain and you simply live with it. It's very hard because it might not be visible to others. You're always in that pain, so you've kind of learned to deal with it. You try to walk as best you can, that sort of thing. But this pain could be seen as invisible to other people. It makes it very difficult when trying to do things. People may get kind of feelings of being inadequate. Why aren't they able to keep up with others? Why can't they do certain things? Why don't people understand what's going on with me? It's a very hard thing to deal with. On top of more general things like inability to do one's job. If somebody can't do the work that they're used to doing, again, that just kind of compounds with already being in pain. You can't do sort of things that make you happy. When people can't do things for themselves, when somebody can't care for themselves, and it leads to those feelings of inadequacy. Why can't I do these things? And not really being sure if people fully understand kind of what's going on. It just kind of goes in a bit of a cycle, and it gets very hard on people. Next up, I actually want to talk about two muscles that are both considered core muscles that are really going to help with preventing chronic low back pain. So we're going to get right into those here. So this is the transverse abdominis, which I mentioned earlier. So it's a very deep core muscle that stabilizes the spine. So it's the muscle that you may have heard people talking about when you're doing exercises like the squat. You want to try to cup, bringing your ribs down toward your pelvis, making a sort of cup shape or a bowl. This is the muscle that helps out with that. It helps maintain your thoracic and pelvic stability. The thing with this is this muscle tends to turn off with people who have low back injuries. So it tends to be something that we have to retrain. quite a bit. What happens when somebody has a back injury is other muscles want to turn on to try to protect your body. Your body tries to protect itself. So this muscle takes a little bit of retraining if it gets turned off due to an injury. The thing with this muscle is for everybody kind of learning to not hold their breath while engaging the core muscles. So when somebody tries to engage the core muscles, if say they're doing a plank exercise and they're just holding their breath and they're squeezing really tight, not necessarily activating your transverse abdomen. We're going to chat a little bit about that when we kind of get into the exercise portion. This muscle is meant to engage, and it should naturally engage when doing large movements. We're going to chat a little bit about that afterwards. So this is the multifidus muscle. So it's one of a large group of muscles that run between each of the vertebrae, very superficial to the spine. So essentially it works on stabilizing the joints that are within the spine. So each of those vertebrae, it helps kind of keep them in place and keeps them stable because they're shifting all over the place. Big purpose of this muscle, the big movement purpose, is the rotation and extension of the vertebral column. So those little movements just when you're kind of standing up nice and tall, if you're doing a little bit of rotations, kind of your sort of daily things, this is the muscle that we want working. So I actually have two articles that are on here in the bibliography. The first one is the activation imbalances in lumbar spine muscles in the presence of chronic low back pain. This is what we talked a little bit about, how when some muscles turn off, others are overworking, and it leads to continued injury. That's a really great article if you want to check that out. The second here down at the bottom is the effect of experimental low back pain on lumbar muscle activity in people with a history of clinical low back pain, a muscle functional MRI study. So with this one, they actually put people through functional MRIs and induce pain in areas of the low back while trying to do certain movements. So it's actually very interesting because reading through it, you understand a little bit about how pain actually affects movement, even if it's subconscious that you don't think that you're purposely stopping yourself because of pain. Sometimes your body takes over and those muscles aren't working up to their full potential. So that goes into a lot more detail about that if you want to get those out. And next up, actually, we're going to move right into the practical portion of this little video here. So we'll see you in a sec. Hey everybody, so we're going to talk a little bit about some movements that are going to help maintain a good back health for us and prevent us from being injured when we get into our training and just in our activities of our daily living. So a couple things that I like to do, that I do these with every one of my training sessions, is a good portion of my warm-up is just spent on ensuring that my upper back is mobile, my low back is nice and stable to keep it good and strong, and also my hips are mobile, so that all three of those, just like I talked before earlier during kind of our lecture portion, we want those to be in a nice balance so that we're not hurting one or the other and causing back problems. So very first movement that we're going to talk about is just using a foam roller like this. If you happen to not have one of these at home, if you have something solid that you can wrap in a towel, that also works just as well. So we're going to get right into the movement here. What you're going to start with is getting that foam roller right underneath your shoulder blades. You're going to lift your hips up a little bit. We're just going to gently roll back and forth. And you're looking at just extending your back very slightly. You don't want to push too hard to the point of pain, but it might get a little bit uncomfortable for people depending how tight you are. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Here you'd probably spend about a minute or so in each section, but just so we kind of get an idea. You're going to want to roll a little bit lower down, more into your mid-back, and then you can get down nice and low. Make sure we're getting through those back muscle tissues. After you get a good couple minutes of that in, you're going to drop your hips right down to the floor. You can either cross your arms right over your chest like this, you can put them behind your head, or you can stretch them out. You can kind of change it as we go through the movement as well. All you're going to do, you're going to let your back extend. Try to take nice deep breaths here. And let yourself just relax. Getting a nice extension through the back. As you're comfortable, you can try reaching a little further.
Again, you'd want to hold that a little bit longer, but just for time's sake here, I'm just going to do a quick little demo. Big thing that we're working on there is making sure that our spine is moving correctly. So just like we talked about earlier, how we have that nice little curve in our spine, we want to try to maintain that and keep all the tissues around it nice and loose for when we start getting into our big movements, especially when we start loading weights onto our bar or using dumbbells. As soon as the body's under load, everything needs to be moving well so that we don't hurt ourselves. So the next movement we're going to talk about is working on our mobility through our T-spine. So as we chatted about earlier, there's a couple different muscle groups that are affecting our back. We have both our flexion, our extension. We also have the obliques that are working on rotational movements as well as resisting those movements. We want to make sure we're nice and stable through our upper back so that we're able to rotate, but also so that we're good and strong there so that we're going to be able to resist rotational forces. Because especially if we get something loaded up onto our back when we're doing heavy squats, we don't want to have one shoulder dropping over the other. That's going to throw our whole body off and throw the whole movement off and not kind of get us where we want to be. So this is one of my favorite movements for working on this. You're just going to come down to all fours. And what we're going to look at, we're going to make sure our hips are nice and stacked over our knees, our shoulders are nice and stacked right over our wrists. So for this one, we're going to do one side at a time. You're going to tuck your hand right behind the head. The purpose of the hand right behind the head is just so that we're not cheating ourselves. Because if we don't have the hand behind the head, we're just at the side, we can easily just push our hips off to the side and not actually be working on rotational movement through the T-spine. We're using kind of other areas to get that rotation in. So just make sure you're not cheating yourself. Hands coming behind the head. We're going to do a little dip down towards the floor, and then we're just going to rotate up, trying to point that elbow right up towards the ceiling. Now, I'm not the best example of this, but what we're looking for is trying to get that elbow right up, getting nice movement through our T-spine. Of course, we do 10 to 15 reps on one side, trying not to hold it too much here. We're doing a little bit of a dynamic warm-up before we get into our training session. And then, of course, we do it through the other side as well. There we go. So next movement we're going to talk about is going to be our dead bug exercise. This is going to get a couple things accomplished during our warm-up. Big thing is, like we talked about earlier, that transverse abdominis muscle. We want to make sure that that's working well before we get into our training sessions, because we want to make sure that we're not hyperextending or overflexing through our back. Both of those would be bad, especially when we start loading up our bars. So the dead bug exercise, is going to work on that transverse abdominis muscle, keeping our back and our spine nice and stable. Simultaneously, we're going to be working on our shoulder range of motion as well as our hip range of motion, making sure that our mobility is good there. So that exercise is going to look nice and simple like this. So we can start with a real basic one. If you haven't really done it before, good to start here. Big thing is, we're going to try to press our low back right into the floor. We're going to try to keep it engaged there. So that back is not coming off the floor. You're not going to be curving your back. You want to keep down nice and tight. Hands are going to come right up overhead. And then all we're going to do, you're going to drop one hand back behind you, and you're going to straighten out that opposite leg. You're going to come back to center, and then same with the other side. So that's going to be our real basic one. When you've kind of done it a couple times and you feel pretty good, you're not getting that curve off of the ground, you're going to bring the legs up. We're going to do same thing here, keeping down nice and tight, back staying flat, extending opposite sides, coming back to center, and then the other sides. Just like so. Big thing with this, you want to make sure that you're just breathing nice and normal. We want to make sure that we're not holding our breath when we do these exercises, because that's not the transverse abdominis working. We don't want to just be clenching in here. We want to make sure that those muscles are staying engaged. Just like we talked about earlier, that TA muscle helps keep the spine nice and in position for when we go through some of our bigger movements later. All right, so we've talked a little bit about some movements that I like to do before getting into a training session. Now, by all means, that is not an exhaustive list of warm-up exercises. You do especially want to do some more movement-specific things. If you're going to be loading up some heavy squats, make sure that you're doing some body weight squat exercises, that sort of thing. One big thing I do want to talk about, which I tend to put in towards the end of training sessions, is a little bit of core strengthening. So when I talk about a core strengthening, it doesn't mean that I want people to go out and just have like an ab day working on their abdominal muscles for like 45 minutes or something like that. That's going to become quite exhausting and actually is going to potentially lead to injuries if we're not ready for that. That being said, I do like to do a little bit of core strengthening kind of towards the end of each strength training session. Also, when we're doing some of our big movements like our squats, our bench press, and our pull-ups, we are also working those core muscles with those movements as well. If things are not staying nice and packed, our movements are not going to look quite so good. So say if I didn't activate my core at all and I just did my squats, probably going to look something like this, which isn't nice and clean. I want to be nice and tight engaged, just like I did earlier with those dead bug exercises. That TA is activated, keeping my spine nice and stable. You're going to be able to squat down. It feels nice and strong. It looks nice and strong. So one of my favorite exercises I find is one of the best things to help strengthen the core towards the end of a session is going to be our very simple plank. So just going through that plank movement, we're going to be up on our toes. Hands are going to be stacked right beneath our shoulders. We're going to bring our feet back. And we're just going to hold here. So a couple of things with our planks. We want to try to keep nice and flat through the back. So that means we don't want to hyperextend through the back. We also don't want to hyperflex at all as well. We want to try to keep nice and straight through here. Just as we talked about earlier, the glutes are a little bit part of the core muscle, so we want to make sure those glutes are squeezed nice and tight. We also want to try to round our shoulders a little bit here. So it's almost like you're pressing your shoulder blades apart. You're going to keep nice and stable here. I'm just going to relax for a moment. When we're looking at doing our planks, we want to aim somewhere, especially if you're just starting out, somewhere between 20 to 40 seconds is going to be a good hold for you. And then towards the end of your sessions, after you've done a couple times, you can aim for that 30 seconds to 1 minute time span and repeat that a couple times, especially with adequate rest in between each of those movements. You can also do your side planks, which can start very simply. Nice basic version, just from the knees. Elbow's going to be stacked right underneath the shoulder, and we're just lifting the hips up. Big thing here we're looking for, again, is not flexing through the hips or the back, and not hyperextending. In this case, too, we also want to be careful that we're not rolling the hips. We want to try to keep a nice straight line from the hips, straight down to the ground. And of course, from here, we can go up to the feet, not the hands. Having that little bit of a longer lever makes the exercise a little bit more different, puts a little bit more work in those core muscles. So the big importance with our planks and our side planks, why they're actually a very great exercise, is that they're resisting some of these forces that our muscles are supposed to be able to resist. So planks are both resisting our overflexion motions as well as hyperextension. Keeping everything nice, packed, and stable in there, really going to build that muscle strength in there. Same being said for side planks. We're resisting that rotational motion, so using those oblique muscles like we talked about earlier. So overall, kind of two of my favorite exercises to do towards end of our sessions. Just make sure that everything's staying nice and strong, and we're not kind of missing anything with our training sessions.
PSP Kingston, the health and wellness provider for the military community.